Good morning. Today I want to dedicate my session to honor the life and work of a friend and a colleague, past president of the World Academy of Art and Science, Walter Truett Anderson, which work I would mention in my slides, and a person that I think is remarkable in every level as a person, as a professional, and that if he hears by any chance this word, want to thank him personally for being a friend and for having given so much to the Academy. My topic today is about narratives. Now we're going to have, great. I think as in the previous session, I hope to have been able to underline, I think it's important to understand if you are interested for a better world, how our personal selves and social selves are structured, how they are made and what they are, how we construe experience at the social, cultural, and individual level, what kind of narratives we create, and the consequences. That's the topic of this morning. Let's talk about what we mean by narratives. It's the fact that our identities, personal identities, but also like a nation identity, a corporation, an association, a non-profit organization, a family. We are mean-making mammalians, and we use a narrative, we use stories, we use fables, to tell ourselves and others who we are and what is important about us. So, the third narrative is like, in literature, a story. What is our life story? But if we are not aware as a culture, as a society, as a community, as an organization, as a family, as a person, of what is our script, our story, our narrative, we might run as a personage, a passive, actor of a comedy or of a tragedy that we have one way, that it runs without our consciousness, that take away our power to rewrite our narratives, our story, our mission on this planet. So, narrative and meaning are one-to-one, but narrative is like in a theatrical piece, the plot. Of course, in terms of narratives, there are macro narratives, and in a culture there is a macro narrative. In a democratic society there are a macro narrative, and then there's so many smaller minority narratives. In something monolithic, probably there's much less space for alternative stories, narrative, vision. By itself, narrative doesn't tell us if it's good or bad for us, for the society in which we live. As a matter of fact, I'll make an example of functional and dysfunctional narrative. So one of the things that's most important to be aware of what is the narrative in our culture, in our society, in our organization, in our family, in ourselves, is to see if it's effective or not. Because narrative are changing all the time, and we can change it just intentionally. Example I have already made that are obvious. For some group, the narrative that is dominant in a society might be particularly disastrous and limiting them, hurting them. Usually, who is mostly affected negatively are, but not only, the groups and the individuals that have less power. Typically women, gay and lesbian, immigrants, minority groups that are identified, for example, in the Western society, blacks or Chicanos, Rom, disadvantaged group. The narrative about Rome in most society, they're thieves. And so immediately we label everybody belonging to that group as a negative. So, if one desire to promote change at whatever level, personal or communal or cultural, socio-cultural, need to be able to identify the consequences that narrative have. Let's use some example that Walter Truett Anderson, past president of the World Academy of Art and Science, and a renowned sociologist and futurologist, speak about in terms of Earth and the dear consequences of some of these narratives. We have lived for 1,000 years, says Anderson, with a narrative, the Genesis from the Bible. An all-powerful God creates man first, and then from a rib, woman, and give us then, as human, the earth. And says, according to the Bible, you are to reign. You are on top of all the animal and plants. They are your disposal. These are your commodity. We took fully advantage of this narrative, destroying a lot of species, polluting the planet, dear consequences. So, understanding the great damage we have done with this kind of narrative to our planet, but also to our own chances of survival, we discovered that we are not the owners of animal or plants. It doesn't work that way, because we create the boomerang effect. We are all together. We have been developing, we call it ecology, consciousness, environmental consciousness, a new narrative. We are all together in this planet, spaceship Earth, and our responsibility is that we have to be in this Garden of Eden, good, effective gardeners. And since the Garden of Eden, that we call planet Earth, is in a mess, what shall we do? Albert Einstein, already saw yesterday, said something, a lot of things are very significant, but this should be pregnant, I think. We cannot solve the problems of today at the level of thinking at which they were first created. We need a new narrative, new way of thinking, new way of knowing, Gary was saying aptly. So we need a change of narrative, and change of narratives are coming in all directions, even in science. For example, a big change of narrative was, I was alluding also yesterday, when we even had with the quantum physics, the revolution of quantum physics, a totally different narrative from before. The Newtonian narrative was not working a more minute space, totally different narrative. Things are not as orderly as we thought. Sometimes photons act as particles, the next moment as waves. Not only that, making science, making a scientific observation is not seeing something objectively, but is a co-creation between the phenomena, the instrument of observation, and the scientists that observe the phenomena with an instrument. So, the new impelling narrative is that everything we know in the universe is relationship. And all the relationships relate all the time, at every level. And so the input is all over. It's not one way, one dimensional. We cannot map the world in which we live in a mechanistic, reductionistic way, because led us astray. We cannot drive with the mechanicistic, reductionistic maps, because we go and bang in a tree or fall off the street, the road. We were, pointing, but, the narrative in the Western world is that I'm titanic or promoter. I'm a man. I can stand alone. But it's totally false. We're never alone. Actually, Lynn Margulis in the 60s showed us the eukaryotic cells, the cells that are in us, and they are in every animal, plant, and fungi. We have the mitochondria that were on this planet once separate organisms, bacteria, that then cohabit one cell nature and stayed on from parasite, not giving the cells any advantage. They became a collaborating relationship. So they are in a symbiotic relationship with us. And in us human, these billions and billions of symbiotic little organisms, billions, hello, good morning. What they do? They work with us, so we are alive. You were pointing out, Janani, yesterday. Without them, all together, since they are invisible to our eyes, but there are so many billions that if by magic I take it off, it's a kilo of billions. It's like yogurt. I ate yogurt this morning, so I welcome in my inside billions of little guys. And when I buy yogurt and put in the refrigerator and I go and teach some other city, I come back and find that when I open the yogurt, did you notice there is some liquid? And you know why? Because those millions of little animals don't have toilet inside the yogurt container. So the liquid is they peed. And that's good. But we don't imagine that we eat billions of organisms, and they're good for us. They are in a nice, positive relationship. So, the mitochondria regulate the metabolism of plants and animals, including humans, and process energy. Without them, we would be, if they strike, we turn off the lights. So, that's a different narrative. We are never alone. But different narrative or different value, as I said yesterday and the day before, different concept of reality, different vision of human nature, generates different relationships, different priority, different goals, different action, and are based. Gary very nicely showed us this morning, energy. Energy is power. But I always underline, because I think it's important, effective and destructive, good and bad, desirable, undesirable. If we are not aware of this, we're not going to be able to change things for the better. So, I divide in narratives that are empowering, life-affirming, potentiality development, human capital protection and promoting, and they are that are destructive and they do the opposite. So, some narratives that are effective are democratic relationships. Everybody has a chance to satisfy needs and develop potentiality. Disempowerment, authoritarian relationship, when my beat is ordered from above and I don't have the power to have an input and collaborate to a common beat. Equal rights and opportunity, compare of narrative of oppression. Sometimes those narrative of oppression stories show where in the family, even in the movie that we saw, women are totally, in a second rank respect to men. And the only hope at the time is to get a husband. Because if you don't get it, you're a flunker. You fail. A woman without a husband is not a full person. Can you imagine something more stupid than that? More dysfunctional, more offensive, more destructive? Every narrative that promotes empowerment promotes responsibility. In what sense responsibility? Not it's your fault, a finger pointing kind of attitude, but the ability to respond, to have the possibility, the ability, the power to respond, to oppose to all the narrative of passivity. One is in the old-fashioned biomedical model that calls the consumer of medical service patient and put them in a passive mode instead of being an active agency to recuperate the best equilibrium of health and well-being. Talking about paradigm, biopsychosocial paradigm, a systemic vision, as opposed to the mechanistic reductionistic paradigm that cut off so many relationships that are very important to understand what is going on. Health promotion compare of just curing illness when it's already, in a sense, too late. Patient-centered medicine as opposed to disease-centered narrative. You know that we have nowadays a lot, especially in the States and other European countries, person-centered medicine where, the results obviously are very, 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 very interesting and cost-effective. To understand that the people are not just to be treated in their specific organ of dysfunction, it makes you to appreciate that people needs. And so, for example, it's scientifically proven if somebody that needs to be in a hospital is put in a room that has a window, and from that window you see greenery, that person will stay less days in the hospital. would have less secondary problem, post-surgery problem. And so, because we needed to be in the relationship with nature, and that is healthy. To be in a cubicle where you don't see normal light, you suffer. A former girlfriend of mine, I spent a year working and training a health professional at Oslo University. Then I moved on, and she's still Susan Schwartz, still a very good friend of mine. She went there, married a Norwegian, and she was telling me, Alberto, I'm happy. I don't have any reason to be depressed, but I'm depressed. I'm going to go in therapy. And she was saying, she's a therapist herself. Alberto, this is a good therapist, but it's not helping. I'm depressed. She was cured by not psychotherapy, sun lamps, because in Norway, there is so little lamps, and she was living in California, that the body without natural light, the sunlight, is deprived and depressed. So, transparency, shared knowledge, as opposed to narrative of spinning and manipulating information. People-centered, seeing people as an incredible resource and variety as richness, as opposed to narrative of racism, sexism, bigotry, etc., etc. Narrative where we aim to have a deep contact with ourselves, with others, with the world, to develop the empathy skills of understanding instead of manipulating. The fact that we have a narrative of respect for all life forms, not just for human beings, as opposed of a narrative that brings alienation from self, others, that show everything as replicated means to achieve a purpose, and the destruction and depletion of human and natural resources. In economy, an example came in my mind is the microcredit narratives that we trust you on your board. And here, just $50, just $100. But you are a woman in village, you would become an entrepreneur. We trust that you know what. And when you have that, you return much better than billions of dollars given to government with the so-called desert cathedrals. But the example that came also in my mind is the incredible, narrative that we have today, profit of all cost. People are secondary. And so the subprime caper that brought from America then to the whole world, a depression and a crisis that has really affected billions of people, and the people that created that, are still having millions of dollars of honorarium and stipend. Doesn't seem a very effective narrative that money, profit at all costs. Let me make another example of very destructive narrative. It's called disease mongering. If you are interested to have more documentation, just Google disease mongering, and you will go to this non-profit Australian foundation that deals, or for example, Italy, the Istituto Mario Negri. And what is the disease mongering? It's hard to believe, but it's inventing sickness. So people who buy new farmings and somebody will make money, it will make you believe that normal human state of affair is a pathology and that should be cured. So it's a process that intentionally turns healthy people in patients and cause iatrogenic arms, damage from the treatment, pharmacological treatment, and waste precious resources. Here, one of the first to PLOS Medicine has a lot of articles on the disease module. So it's important to see what is going on, and basically, they do invest a lot of money in researching what kind of illness can be invented, and people convinced that. So we have to understand how this is socially construed, and this kind of narrative are even bought by insurance companies. Even Illich, in the book Medical Nemesis, many years ago already was sounding a warning on this kind of phenomenon. But it's been always, I don't know, so for example, if many knows that Sigmund Freud had a cousin, and that cousin became one of the geniuses of that epoch of marketing, creating new needs. He understood his cousin, Sigmund, scientific reasoning, and he went to tobacco company and said, I have a way to make you double your sales cigarette. And they say, how? Well, I'm going to make women that nowadays are not smoking, at the time was a man kind of vice, become enamored with smoking cigarettes. And they dismiss it and say, oh, impossible. Say, no, it's very possible, and I know how to make it. And I'm also sure of the fact that I ask you just to pay small amount of money to a pilot project, and if I am successful, you will pay me in 2 years a percentage of the sale that you have increased by having now women as your customer. And he went in New York, hired the most beautiful, the women that fashion designer hired to wear their dress, and put them in the most glamorous cafe in New York, smoking cigarette. And the thing was so incredible because women were not smoking cigarette. I remember, I'm born in 1946. My mother, when I was a little kid, said of a neighbor, that woman smoked cigarette. That was almost, like a concept that a woman smokes cigarette is not really a serious woman, because serious women do not have that kind of vibes. And so he made cigarette glamorous, marketing, a sort of image of desirability, of sexiness, of sophistication. So, disease mongering is a very destructive narrative that they say, well, it's okay to make money by creating a new need, a perceived need, and selling the satisfaction of that perceived need. So we need to be aware of this, and the protection and promotion of health is also including reducing the inappropriate and misleading and unethical marketing of health products and services that are just misleading people's knowledge. So, with all example, we are at a crossroad, as always we are. But since then, the problems are growing in magnitude in our planet. So what we're gonna bet? Are we gonna witness a new jump, quantum jump in human evolution, or we're gonna have a bigger and more tremendous boomerang effect of our lack of awareness? It's like we have learned to be helpless. You know, things happen, you know, the ice is melting, but what can we do? So, we really need to be aware, in my opinion, that the narratives can be life-affirming and facilitating us to fully tap and develop our potentiality, or the opposite, be true false. Let me give you some example. Somebody's functional personal narrative. People that feel deep inside themselves, I'm suffer because I'm a victim of whatever, you know, whatever. If I blame my suffering as an external source, I am making myself impotent. That's a self-destructive narrative. You can say, I'm treated injustice, I'm oppressed, so I'll use all my capability to get out of this situation. That's a positive. I'm a psychotherapist, as I said, so I hear so many self-fulfilling, negative, self-destructive narratives. I am miserable, but it's not my fault. It's all the fault of my parents. Great. Now, not only you suffering, but you are impotent to avoid the suffering because your parents are dead and they cannot undo what they did. If you live by this narrative, you're going to be suffering forever. They say, I had a difficult childhood, what can I do to help myself even better? How can I adopt myself since my parents were not supporting enough? Or a very self-defeating narrative, although it doesn't look apparently to one that has it and the other, the perfectionist. It's important for me to be loved, to be perfect in everything I do, to be better than everybody else. Good luck, baby. It's impossible. Or people that are always, never at rest. Nothing terrible, no tragedy has occurred to me. So, even more probable that it's going to happen soon. People, my poor mother, that was a little pessimistic, used to find people in the street of Florence in our neighborhood, and the people were saying, Signora Zucconi, how are you? As a greeting. And my mother would never even we had the bad moments, certainly, but in the good moments, my mother would never say, good, thank you, everything is well. She would say, non ci possiamo lamentare. I cannot lament about anything at the moment. Very revealing. I cannot lament about anything.
Nothing to complain about, isn't it?
Yeah. Let me show you some functional. My mother was, by the way, a wonderful person, and I feel only gratitude towards her. But some of the things
we know she must have been.
some of the things that were sounded funny to my ears also as a baby. Let me make some example of functional narrative. The thing basically I have the right to exist. I have the right to exist. I'm alive. It's my right. Which means I don't have to do something to make people excuse me if I exist. Excuse me if I'm this one. No. I have a right to exist. I can learn what at present I don't know. People all the time have an undermining narrative, say, oh, I don't know it. That's it. So I'm input. No, I don't know it. It means I can learn it to know it. If I identify my lacks, well, I can fulfill my needs. Another positive narrative that is not a cognitive, it's a feeling, it's a emotional patterns, of course, is neuronal pathways. I'm not talking about just the thinking, rational. I do not have to be perfect, but I can learn for my mistake. This kind of narrative, I would also give another name, wisdom. I cannot do everything by myself, but when I need, I can ask for help. Very fragile is the person that wants to do everything by himself or herself. Another one that I think is extremely positive. I'm often afraid, but fears do not necessarily stop me from being courageous. There are people that are afraid and they let the fear froze them. Or some people, I was a very shy boy, very shy. And I felt, not knowing anything about psychology, that this was a real danger for me. I was especially shy with girls, and even 10 times more with the girls I was attracted to. I'm talking about no sexual attraction, but 4, 5, 6, 7, when you get socialized. And so I remember suffering because I was really shy, blushing. I would force myself to go near the girls I like and express in an awkward way my like, because otherwise I feel forever I would be, confined to be alone. Unfortunately, I must say that I'm shy even today, but I don't think my shyness has stopped me from being courageous and contact people also if I feel more tentative and less secure than others. So I'm not talking about panacea. I'm talking about, perseverance and vision and courage to want to change his own destinies. So I hope to have been clear what I think, along with a lot of other psychologists, for example, that there are profound differences and profound different results by different narratives. So, no matter what we do as a social role, can be mother, can be parent, father, teacher, minister of foreign affairs at any level. Very important question. In our team, in our nation, in our community, I, in first person, do I create and support a narrative of hope and liberation or narrative of oppression, reification, and compliance with the dysfunctional status quo? Every day we make decisions, consciously or not. Every day we are part of the solution. Every day we might be part of the problem. So that kind of moral responsibility often is put under the carpet, and cognitive dissonance, not to ask the consequence of what we do. So I propose that we badly need a compass for this area that you know, as Walter Truett Anderson has written and spoken a lot, is the Anthropocene era. Is a member of our Academy of Art and Sciences, Paul Cruzen, that has created this expression, meaning that today behavior of human beings is the number one variable affecting all the life form on this planet. And we have to get a new, better compass, a new and better paradigm, as we say in the World Academy of Art and Science, in the World University Consortium, and we're going to speak in the second course this week here. Carl Rogers says something I agree totally. At the base of anything that a scientist or a professional, I would say, undertakes is, first of all, an ethical and moral value judgment that he makes. We always, consciously or unconsciously, make choices. So, in today's quagmire of mountain problem, I think what is tantamount is to develop our capacity for deep concept. In my field, it's called mental health. That is the capacity to be deeply in touch with myself and my basic needs with other people, but all the life form. That is important, because sometimes we try to solve problems in a mechanicistic, reductionistic way, and we create even more bigger problems. Sometimes it would be better not to do anything, because if you have the wrong maps, you risk to have a more boomerang effect. Here, the slide about Paul Cruzen calling this area the Anthropocene. So, I think the World Health Organization, for which we are at the HPA Collaborative Center, has a good biopsycho social definition of what is health. Health promotion is the process of enabling people to increase control over and improve their health. To reach a state of complete physical, mental, and social well-being, an individual or a group must be able, not his doctors, an individual or a group must be able to identify and to realize aspirations, to satisfy needs, to change or cope with the environment. Health seen as a positive concept, not just lack of illness, absence of illness, emphasizing social and personal resources as well as physical capacity. Therefore, health promotion is not just the responsibility of the health sector, but goes beyond the healthy lifestyle to well-being. This is the manifesto of health promotion that came out of the 1986 meeting of all the nations belonging to the WHO, World Health Organization, in the city of Ottawa, Canada. Let's see another citation for our Walter Truett Anderson. We are the only species that create artificial intelligence and fill the skies with artificial satellites. We are the species that impact all other life on Earth and has become to know it, to be aware of, and to contemplate the possibility that we have placed Earth in grave jeopardy. So, it's not enough, but it's an important start. Awareness. As a matter of fact, Walter Truett Anderson states, it's not too hard, most of the time, to sleepwalk along through life. basically blind, with our eyes closed, with our ears closed, without mouth shut, without being disturbed by the cumulative knowledge of our enormous weight on the planet. This knowledge now is coming at us from all the directions. But once in a while, especially when we look hard at evidence of global climate change, spreading desert, raging storm, suffering wildlife, we find that the aspect of Earth, humanity, evolving, accelerating, painful to contemplate. That's why that another narrative that I spoke also with Walter Truett Anderson, where we were invited by the Biblioteca Alessandrina in Alexandria, Egypt, preceded by another fellow of the Academy, Ismail Serra Gladin, that, sometimes we look afraid what we see and negate, deny. So, since we need in a period of globalization, of growing complexity, to meet our present and future challenge, we need a new and effective way to go. So, new capacity of our ways of knowing are required. There is a project in our academy that Gary also mentioned, ways of knowing. We need, in my opinion, to foster, to promote a new psychological literacy. People are ill-equipped to cope with the notions that we're talking about. We need to get it for free to billions of people, to the inhabitants of planet Earth. A sort of psychological compass, a needed systemic way of being and of knowing in order to navigate the rippling current of change. And here, let me cite Julian Huxley, the scientist. It is as a man has been suddenly appointed director of the biggest business of all, the business of evolution. Appointed without being asked if he wanted it and without proper warning and training on the job. What is born this time? Humankind cannot refuse the job. Whatever he wants or not, whatever he is conscious what he's doing or not, is the point of fact determining the future direction of evolution on this earth. This is an inescapable destiny, and the sooner he realizes and starts believing in it, the best is for all concerned. I really share Huxley's vision. We like it or not, it is upon us. Since we are creating the mess, we better clean it. Let's see what the past president, Gayoom, of the Republic of the Maldives, beautiful country that I visited with my partner, that's I say, is so little, few meters above these, coral atolls. They're losing a country pretty soon. Gayoom is the president, now is a past president, that made a press statement underwater to underline the dramaticity that his country is facing, for the fault of others, that melting ice, they're going to have no house, no country. And so he says, the narrative that we call international law are insufficient for dealing with today's problem. I agree. With an international community based upon the rule of law and universal value of equality, human rights, and dignity, it's certainly wrong for small, vulnerable community to suffer because of the action of our more powerful, big, resource-rich country, action over which they have no control and little or no protection. And we're running out of a country, somebody is dispossessing us, I don't have any tool to sue anybody. When the Universal Declaration of Human Rights was drawn upon in 1948, its author could not have imagined the complex global interconnectedness that climate change would lead to today. So, now it's clear that the devastating international impact of greenhouse gas emissions give to countries undeniable international responsibility for the human rights consequences of their big country policies. Human rights law and institutions need to evolve fast to raise to this unprecedented challenge. Created human rights lawyers should push to have courts recognize future injury. This is, the author is groundwork, as you see, in 2008. We are 2014. We have in our board of trustees, Winston Nagin, that is very, vocal about this, and will be teaching here in the next course. So he can say more better than me. So there is a big evidence of climate wrongs, and even there, what I mentioned of medicine mongering was happening just the same. Industry that are especially well known to pollute and to create the greenhouse gas were shelling out millions for bogus research that would negate the evidence of climate warming through man-made activities. That's not nice. Research in the social sciences, you see Neil Parkman, will lead us to better understanding how we can change our attitudes and thus ensure a healthy future for our planet. The goal to raise the awareness of all people is key to making lasting changes to help our environment. Awareness is the name of the game. So, I think I have underlined what we need. Let me recap before I finish. We need to promote functional narratives at every level: socio-cultural, environmental, scientific, economic, and psychological. We need a new and effective way to cope with our changed reality, a way to become aware how we construe our experience, our narrative of what we call reality, our relationship, ourselves, others, and the world. I say this very often, but it's crucial, it's central, it's basic. We cannot just talk. We have to feel it. We have to be able in contact. First of all, with ourselves. I'm not in contact with myself. I cannot be in contact with others. I cannot relate to life on this planet because I'm not related to life inside me. We need to foster at every level of society the awareness of our narrative, our power, and our responsibility for the present and future of mankind and the whole planet. So, we need to promote a new and socially compelling forward-looking vision of evolution that brings together the work of science, of art and spirit, evolutionary theory and developmental psychology in my mind. An updated recipe for resilience of how to think, feel and act outside the present obsolete mechanicistic box. We have a very ambitious project to facilitate, bringing together all the planet's stakeholders, the formulation of a new paradigm. How we map reality, either our, others, the planned reality is not working. We have to start from scratch to go and design a paradigm that give us understanding and tools to manage reality, because we're not doing too well. So, to the new paradigm, I don't know what it's going to be, how it's not being formulated. Certainly, our academy is not with the head on the clouds to think we can alone. We want just to facilitate the process. But we smell something, certainly that we have to be more aware of the inexplicable word of relationship. Relationship is going to be one of the variables. Listen to this to tell you that I'm convinced we need a new paradigm, new tools. It estimated there are around 100 million tons of garbage in the world's oceans. There are 5 identifiable garbage islands, giant continent, I would say, North and South Pacific, North and South Atlantic, and Indian Ocean. The garbage patches are poisoning the ocean food chain, and Captain Charles Moore, that is the story, is the founder of Algalita Marine Research Foundation. Listen to Frosty Woodridge, that is a famous man that on bicycle went all over the United States. What he found? Tremendous. One thing really bothered me during my bicycling journey across America. We have turned this once pristine continent with all its inherent beauty, wildlife, and treasure into a big, giant garbage dump. At 50 miles per hour, a person in a bicycle really see what's happening in this country instead of fast on the autoroute. Black, brown, red, and white America toss their trash everywhere, like it's not their country. They toss things in the rivers, lakes, streams, and along every road. They leave vehicles, trailers, couches, and cans of oil by the hundreds of thousands, if not millions, everywhere. In the woods, on abandoned lots, and without rhyme or reason. They toss cans, plastic containers, bottles, solid baby diapers into the prettiest mountain stream and along hiking paths. Not just the river, but into the millions. Yuck! Yuck! Why we do this? This is our planet. This is our beautiful home. Why? In psychology, we have a name. Alienation. I don't feel that is mine. I don't feel that it concerns me. I don't see beauty because I'm blind. Again, Julian Huxley. It is as a man has been suddenly appointed director of the big business of all, the business of evolution. Appointed without being asked if he wanted and without proper warning and preparation. He cannot refuse the job. So, throwing millions of garbage, but we cannot refuse the job. Otherwise, it's the end for everything. And now I'm there for Julian Huxley, and I'm also an optimist along with my colleagues at the Academy. Otherwise, why would we work so much for free? It's not in the hope to give our contribution, humble contribution to a better world. So, as I said, a psychological compass, and summing it up, I use a citation for Rollo May, famous psychologist. In every act of love and will, and in the long run, they are good both present in each genuine act, we mold ourselves and our world simultaneously. So, I can do a lot because by an act of will, Rollo May says, has consequences. Like has consequences, I would say, an act of laziness to be a passive spectator. This is what it means to embrace the future. This is a beautiful picture given to me by my dear friend Anthony Hopkins that I think is online, one of the participants of this course. Thank you, Anthony. And I finish with a synthesis of what we need, which is a life-affirming narrative. Today, in order to assure also tomorrow our science and our conscience, our feeling, our thinking, and our action need to be grounded in the awareness of an inextricable bond we have with each other and with every life form. A really life-affirming narrative is to feel that we are the earth, we are the people, like the famous song When I Was Young was saying. Thank you.
Thank you, Alberto. That was really inspiring. And I hope we're going to come back to this next week because this really is central message for the new paradigm and a great way for us to start off next week. I had some question, but I think Ranjani has a question, and maybe there are others online, so let's let them get a chance. Ranjani?
Okay, this is Ranjani working as a research associate at the Mother Service Society India. I thoroughly enjoyed your presentation, Dr. Zucconi. I loved it. So I have a question here with respect to perfectionism. You mentioned that perfectionism, wanting to be perfect is impossible and that is dysfunctional. As a perfectionist myself, this kind of intrigued me and I'd like to know why, as an ideal, perfectionism is an ideal for most people. Why is this considered dysfunctional? And also, we've heard Gary and Germany mention how Steve Jobs accomplished at a greater level just by being perfect at whatever work he did. So, why is being perfect, considered something negative?
I'll repeat the question so to be sure everybody heard it. Ranjani is a junior fellow of the Academy and our associate editor for Cadmus Journal, as well as working at Mother Service Society. Her question was, Alberto had given a list of dysfunctional narratives, and one of them was related to perfection. I can't repeat it. So her question is, while wanting to do things perfectly is an ideal for most people, why is perfectionism considered dysfunctional? She identified she herself is a perfectionist, and she mentions Steve Jobs seemed to be a perfectionist in what he was doing as well. Isn't wanting to be perfect more of an aspiration? That's her question.
Thank you. In psychotherapy, we consider perfectionism a dysfunction because we see it in the life of the people that come for help, since if I am a perfectionist, not somebody that wants to do his best, that's different. But if I am a perfectionist, by definition, I never feel accomplishment because I want the impossible. And it would be somebody like always running without having rest. Would be somebody never having in a sense of accomplishment because would be like Sisyphus, effort, always trying to reach the top, but falling inexorably down the bottom every time. Is a self-defeating mechanism, but to strive for excellence, I would say that is another thing, to be inspired. So, when you see how people construe their wish to be perfect, you see something very dramatic and sad. They feel that they're not lovable. And so they have to pay their ticket to acceptance or love by others, being super all the time. So sad, so self-defeating, such a waste.
So, if I've understood you, Alberto, you're making a distinction. You're not saying that the aspiration for perfection or excellence is wrong, but how people construe their own performance. If I'm striving for something which by definition is unattainable or unsustainable, because we're human, if I take joy in doing it more perfectly, it can be a positive narrative. But when I find myself, when I feel sorry and fault myself for my incapacity to do something which is beyond human, then it becomes a negative narrative.
Yeah, and if I can give even a more simple term, we see in people that burn out. Mm-hmm. It's very healthy to have stresses and to have the need to have a big performance. So, if I need to run, it's great that I'm able to run and that I sweat and I have fatigue. But then it's important to rest. That's important to rest. And if I don't do that, my stress, that is called eustress, become distress. When the stress is chronic, has a debilitating, effect. So that's why work alcoholics, they think they can do more working all the time. The research shows actually they're much less productive in the long run. And nowadays, work organization oblige their people to go on vacation and take a break. Because if they're working all the time, one, they make life impossible for the other worker. And two, they're not so creative being one-dimensional all time. I hope this has answered your question.
Any other questions?
Yes, it does.
She said yes.
Thank
Anyone
you.
else out there have a question online? I have. Yes, okay, that's what we want.
Okay. You mentioned the human rights. I'm wondering about how we can apply or adapt the human rights to the ongoing globalization processes. Because, as you mentioned, in 1948, when the human rights were established, nobody could think about how computers could change the world and how we have access to financial systems or access to knowledge. And we would think also in relation with information technology, we can improve the human rights such a way that maybe IT should be in human rights?
It's a very good question, but I don't have at all a good answer because I'm too ignorant. Now, if my friend and colleague Winston Nagin, that is a professor of law, by the way, and a former, colleague of Nelson Mandela, he's from South Africa, would probably give you a good answer. But if I say something, it would be the voice of an ignorant that doesn't know. I'm talking because I don't have, I have only some expertise. I'm talking about my conviction that we can do better in the kind of narrative that we call rule of law. But how that can be applied I'm ignorant of it, so I don't have an answer. If I give an answer, I would have to just invent one. It wouldn't be respectful of your question. So I have to say, I personally don't have an answer.
Ali, could you repeat the question?
Yeah, as you mentioned, the human rights, which were established in 1948, was a time period where industrialization processes maybe began, but nobody could think also of Watson when he was coming, when he founded IBM. It was a very good saying of him. He said, the world needs 5 computers. But what kind of computers he meant? Yeah? And if you are going to look about the process now, IT is going to be a booster for every process in financial system, education, everybody else knows typing anything about, and we are doing these educations by somebody else in the world. And do you think by birth that bans what Mila said yesterday is a right for everybody? Do you think that by birth access to IT should be human right?
Well,
and how we can establish by law?
Basically, I would think, and that's our challenge in the World University Consortium, that people should have the right to access education. Now, to say that the access should be mandatorily through some tools, personally, I have no, thought. I think for me would be much more important that people have access to information, and how they get the information is not so important as long as they have access. And so, for example, I think nowadays we all very interested about everybody has 1, 2, I see people also 3 phones. I don't think that is, in my opinion, just a positive phenomenon at all. I think paradoxically, there is less communication when there is a communication overflow. I think sometime to be able to talk to your neighbor, and often in every country I go, I see boy and girl clearly in love, but they don't see and talk to each other. They, work with their cell phone. I don't think that all this connectiveness is just positive. I think just that people should have choices. But then you get into the question how you solve problems. I'm from the standpoint of empowering. So I don't think I would want to decide what is good for people, but so much giving people the power to have choices. That's the best answer I can do. Also, I'm very ignorant in communication technology.
I think Alberto's point, bringing in education is very appropriate, because essentially all over the world now, we have not only agreed that education is a right, a fundamental human right. In practice, it's the responsibility. Nobody says today you can get education you want. It says the government has to ensure the availability of education for everybody. We've gone even further than that. We've said in almost every country, I don't know for sure every country, we say education is a mandatory requirement. Because without education, you cannot be a fully functional individual in modern society. You can't take care of yourself. You can't manage your tax accounts. You can't know whether you're getting the correct salary or not. You cannot survive. You can't drive a car if you can't read the manual or learn the driving instructions. So I think school is one way of empowering people by giving a certain level of knowledge. No, we all agree, whether a student in the U.S. and many countries, a student has the right to homeschool them. They don't have to go to school, but the parents have to ensure that the child is getting educated. So whether we access our information through one way or another, I think today, as schools are, we can't immediately, anyway, replace the traditional school system because we don't yet have a better system, a more effective and efficient system to offer that knowledge to all human beings. In fact, one of the reasons we started the World University Consortium is because we believe there's got to be a better way to do this, a way that can extend what's now available to still a relative minority of humanity to the rest. I mean, we calculated, for example, in India, you would have to increase the higher educational system 5-fold if you wanted to provide higher educational opportunity, not compulsion, to everybody of that age. And that's just not going to happen in a reasonable period of time. It's just too slow a process. It's too costly a process. There's not the money. There are not the qualified teachers. So if we can do it over the internet or through any other means that we can extend that, empower people and give them the access, I think it's not the internet today is like the educational system of yesterday. It's an enabler. It's an empowerer. And those who don't have access to it, we're not going to force feed people, but if they don't have that access, then they're deprived of the opportunity that others have, just like they're deprived, and there are many people in Africa and even in India where they're deprived of access to a good education as well. So it's a very, I think, I agree with Alberto, the person who would be speaking on this very well is Winston, because he's looking at the idea of what is a human right is itself a moving target. It's itself evolving. When the U.S. was started, the joke, I call it a joke, it wasn't very funny, but, when we wrote the Declaration of Independence, all men are created equal and endowed with certain inalienable rights like the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. But they really meant all men, and what they really meant was all white men. They didn't apply that to women. They didn't certainly apply it to blacks, and most of them owned slaves. And in the U.S., my grandmother was a suffragette fighting for women's right to vote. They got the vote only in 1920. And I think maybe somebody mentioned it this weekend, that in Switzerland...
71.
71. This highly democratic country. 71 the women got the right to vote. I also mentioned a few days ago that FDR's plan was that as soon as World War II was over, he wanted, what the Bill of Rights is in the U.S. All our fundamental rights are not in the Constitution. The fundamental rights are in an amendment to the Constitution, which was called the Bill of Rights, the first amendments. And he was planning a constitutional amendment to say that employment must be considered a fundamental human right. Not that we're going to force everybody to work. And I think there's we've written about it, Winston has written about it in our journal. In a society where everything is so structured, everything is controlled by government in the sense, in the U.S. at least, I cannot build an extension to my own house and wire it and put in the plumbing. It has to be done by a licensed contractor. In many places, you can't run a business in your home. You can't plant farming, you can't grow your food anywhere you want it. You can't keep cows and horses in a residential neighborhood, even if you want fresh cow's milk every day. We're restricted in so many ways by the structures of modern society that limit our capacity and our freedom to do things, presumably in the best interests of everybody. But that society which restricts and limits us, then also has an implied responsibility for being sure that there are at least the opportunities for everybody, because in a modern market economy, if you don't have a job and you don't have your own business, then how do you survive? How do you have awareness? So the idea, in other words, and by the way, you mentioned, I think, one of you, Winston's also working on a project about dance. You mentioned Mila's reference to dance. And they are also together working on a project about aesthetic rights. Do human beings have aesthetic rights, and should they be recognized in future? I think it's a moving target, like Maslow's hierarchy of needs. As civilization develops, we're going to recognize and try to empower people for higher levels of rights.
Oh, one word very interesting, because you talk both about responsibility. Former German Chancellor Helmut Schmidt one time compared the Human Rights Declaration with somehow defining human responsibility charter. And how we can
said the right thing.
How we can maybe establish on a worldwide manner not only the human rights in controversy to that point, human responsibility declarations.
Would you like to comment?
Yeah, so I've been waiting to comment on the opposition to rights, and then you started to speak about the responsibilities. Yes, first of all, it is very well connected, the problem of rights and the problem of responsibilities. For example, if we take into account the problem of contamination of the oceans, we all have the right to live and to enjoy nature and to enjoy the clean and so on nature. But still, at the same time, we have a responsibility not to contaminate it. And many other issues, like right to aesthetics in buildings, and it is also we have a right to aesthetics rights, but at the same time, these are people who are building things which do not look very much aesthetical. And that's why Dr. Haberlation, whom I'm talking about very often, and I'm lucky to work with him for some 7 years at least, he also thought about creation of a declaration of human responsibilities opposite to the one of the human rights. Because we are all talking about the human rights and that people are oppressed somehow and that not all of the rights can be performed. But we never speak about our obligations to our neighbors, partners, country, family, and world. And Dr. Haberlation created the first basic document in which he tried to express his own seeing of the Declaration of Human Responsibilities. And if you are interested in, I can even read it now. It's a short one.
Sure,
just some. Okay, so speak the first one. Speak the truth, be honest, act according to moral ethical standards. Then maintain your health in the best possible state in order not to burden the society with the cost of your health care. Learn, develop your talents, capabilities, competence throughout your life to be a productive member of the society. Treat others as you would like others to treat you. Be a free person, which means the ultimate judge of what is true and what is not, what is good and what is bad, yet keep testing your judgments to make sure that it is in the line with moral, ethical principles. Search for harmony between your private, professional, social lives, and that as part of the community. While seeking to ascertain your rights, avoid constraining other members of the society to ascertain theirs. solve as many problems, issues as possible at individual, family, community levels to lighten the burden and cost of governance. And then next set of obligations is commemorated to different areas of our life, like to family. Cherish cultural heritage from our predecessors, treat parents with love and respect, help them if needed, deal with siblings as if they were your best friends. Then to parents. Our obligations to our parents, love it, not just parents' obligations to the world, is love your children, facilitate their education and development of their talents and personalities as free people. Obligations to community. Help the community to be effective in supplying all services such as primary education, healthcare, social services. Contribute to the well-being of all members of the community while maintaining your identity. Be consciously part of the world, of the whole world community. Then obligations to the environment. Use all resources sparingly. Avoid pollution of the biosphere. Help preserve biological and zoological diversity. Obligations to your country. Obey the laws of the country. Help your country in line with your ability, capacity to maintain the priority of the common good, like full political freedoms, a certain level of economic well-being of the whole population, social justice, and healthy environment. Then obligations to future generations, leave the physical environment in the better state than inherited, with enhanced cultural heritage values to enable future generations to be more effective in political, economic, social, cultural aspects of the societies. And the last point is obligations to the world. Be tolerant and respectful of all races, ethnics, religions, languages, customs. Learn some languages and at least basic things about other civilizations. Promote the understanding of the diversity of civilizations, their values, thus peaceful cooperation and fair trade. That's all. This is the basic document produced some 10 days ago, and Dr. Coalition sent it to all the members of the World Academy of Art and Science and the University Center, and hopefully it will be one of the points discussed during the conference on the new World New Paradigm. Yes, if you're interested, I can send it to you.
Please, yes, please.
The first draft.
Did I miss it, or I'm missing the term food somehow?
Food?
Yeah, but because I think food is one of the most important things ever for everybody, or is it included in somehow other terms? I didn't get it.
Well, this is not rights. This is responsibilities of the individual.
Yes, maybe there are saying in some cultures that I am responsible for my neighborhood.
Yes.
That they have, if they are hungry, I cannot be in somehow harmony with myself because they are hungry. So I am responsible for that they are not hungry in somehow. I didn't get it really enough.
So there wasn't a point about food, that's for sure. But regarding the responsibility of caring about your neighbors, I think that it is meant that if you see that your neighbors have some problems and you are capable of helping them somehow, if it's food, then just give some food to them. So this is your obligation to not to stay indifferent.
But since the topic we're discussing now is narratives, I would say that we appreciate both them, wanting to underline a point that, in my opinion, Bogdan is basically saying, Well, we have an important narrative that is human rights. And in my opinion, Bogdan says, there is another needed addition to this human rights narrative that is also responsibilities. And on that, as I wrote to him, agree that the narrative for responsibility is as important as yin and yang, right, and responsibility. As a matter of fact, empowerment, as I tried to underline several times, it sounds a word that's easy. People should be empowerment, but empowerment is responsibility. A healthy individual has introjected not only the fact that I have power, but that having power carry responsibility. Every healthy, mature individual is very aware of his responsibility towards himself, others, and the world. That's the whole point that we were trying to underline. And in agreement, not necessarily with the specific items, we will discuss Bogdan items, but certainly the idea, I think Bogdan had an excellent idea to say that in the world nowadays, where everybody is, rightly so, I would add, underline the rights, well, rights come with responsibilities. Otherwise, it's a lopsided way to talk about rights.
I really like your list of functional personal narratives. And if we have time, I was going to just put a question to ask others, both here and online, to give examples of what they would consider functional personal narratives. You stressed in two of the ones you gave as examples, I can learn what I do not know, and I do not have to be perfect, but I can learn from my mistakes. In Pride and Prejudice, another one comes up, which we were discussing a few days ago. I can learn not only from my experience and my mistakes, but I can learn from other people's experience. And in the story, the heroine, Elizabeth Bennet, is told by Darcy that Wickham had tried to elope with his sister and ruin his family, would have ruined his family. And when she read that, her sympathies were with Wickham, and she thought, oh, well, after all, it's a casual error of youth. It doesn't really mean anything. But 6 months later, he did the same thing with her sister, and virtually threatened to ruin, at that time, 200 years ago, the whole family and the marriage prospects of any of the girls. And only then she began to understand the significance of the lesson. So one of the narratives, we can read a novel and learn from somebody else's fictitious experience. We can learn from other people's experience everywhere instead of saying, I wouldn't have been so stupid to do that, or, well, there, I'm lucky. What is there I can learn from what's happening to others?
Well, that's interesting because you, and generally you always show vivid example, and I would agree with you, that we can learn it, and the positive. You tended to always present the positive. I would say, as a psychologist, unfortunately, the word that I see is, at the moment we are born, we learn it, we like it or not. And most of what we learn are narrative that are actually oppressive narrative, that are life-threatening narrative. There are vampire narrative, viruses of vitality, of creativity, of human rights, that if we are not aware, we don't learn from it. And I agree totally with you that one of the function of fable kids story, literature is learning, like vicarious learning is called in psychology. I don't learn by direct experience, but I empathize, I identify with the hero of the novel. But all this famous novel story, even money, if you take a $1 bill, I didn't check it, but I was in the States until a few days ago. In God we trust. That's a narrative. On a bill, in God we trust. Or when I go to India, I also save those banknotes where there is Gandhi. I thought, wow, I like this, bank bill, putting Gandhi. I'm saying this because, unfortunately, I feel, I don't know if somebody lives in India agree with me, that Gandhi is more famous abroad than in India. I don't hear my Indian friends talk about Gandhi very much, as much my Italian, French, or American. But going back to the narrative is absolutely true. But unfortunately, also, because a true novel, you see, look at the stories and see how much oppression, even in language. That's why we have to be aware that narratives are everywhere. And so religions are narratives, enormous narratives. Constitutions are narrative. Law are narrative that are mandatories. And movie are narrative and joke. But let me explain what I'm trying to say with the comparison. For example, I'm born in 1946, and I've been one of the people, involving myself and stating that we lived in the 50s in an area of stupid, dysfunctional repression of expression of sexuality. And so we were, talking about that. But if you go today in Italy or in other European countries to buy the New York Times at the newspaper stand, at your eyes, there is a lot of gynecological publication. They are porno magazines, not in the States. They are more crude. But you can buy a newspaper and you cannot avoid to have porno flicks dangling under your eyes. And so did we win that battle? Absolutely not. Because pornography is the total reification of sexuality. So when sexuality was taboo, you had a chance to change that rigidity. Now that it's all a blob, it's even more hard to teach and to defend healthy sexuality because sexuality is being reificated. So, sometimes narratives, are not functional because they are, more free. Freedom sometimes is freedom of exploiters to exploit you more freely. And so we have to see the narratives we cannot escape, but we can escape ignorance, illiteracy. That's what I'm talking about. So if a right I would want to vouch for is the right to awareness, much more important than to have access to technological means and being unaware and be more exploited and reificated. First of all, for me, is awareness.